Dr. Nicola Dehlinger with Purview Healthcare. Thank you for joining us. And if you don't know Nicola, great individual, wonderful, getting ready for vacation apparently. So
Yes.
glad we were able to have you join us for today's Lunch and Learn. And with that, I will turn it over to you. And do you want people to ask questions throughout or wait till the end?
Yeah, you can ask anytime, no problem. And
Okay,
you can
so just
either
raise your
ask,
little hand in
it can,
the little function down below, or start flagging, waving at us.
yeah, you can raise your hand or just jump in. You can unmute yourself anytime, or you can also chat, and Kim's going to be looking at the chat to help me moderate that, because can we usually only do one thing at a time. And a
Great.
little plug for the Leadership La Plata. My husband did it in 2015-16 and just loved it. So I highly recommend it if you've ever thought about it. He got more out of it, and he's still involved with the organization to this day. So yeah, another plug for Leadership La Plata. Cool. Well, today I'm going to share my screen here. And what I wanted to talk with you about today is cultivating resilience. And the reason I wanted to, sorry, I'm having a hard time. Let's see here. What I wanted to do was, kind of go over resilience, primarily because, it's been a really long couple of years. And if you were having a hard time before the past 2 years, it's just seemed like it's gotten harder. And so when we talk about resilience and really, what do we need physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to have to deal with adverse circumstances? I think one of the hardest things that I've noticed personally and also in my office about this COVID situation is that typically us humans have a lot of resilience to deal with a stressor, and then we have a break and we have recovery, and then we deal with the stressor, then we break and we recover. And with the ongoing stresses and worries and complications of this pandemic, I think it's just been really hard on the human spirit in a lot of different ways. And so I wanted to take some time today to talk about, what do we do about that? When we feel like the rubber band has been stretched too thin, when we feel like we just don't have that reserve that we're used to calling on during difficult times. And there's actually some really tangible things that we can do every day to help cultivate resilience. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And like I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to jump in at any time. Right now, I can't see anybody. So if hands raised, Kim, would you just let me know? I don't know what I did to get rid of the screen, but there it is. So what we're going to talk about today is, what is resilience, and how do we really define that? And then what are some of the things that impact our resiliency? And then what can we do to improve it? And then I'm happy to have extra time at the end for questions. So the definition of resilience is the ability to recover quickly from illness, change, or misfortune. It also refers to buoyancy. And when I think about the human spirit, this concept of buoyancy, especially now, is more important than ever. How do we get out from under when we felt really, really heavy or burdened by the circumstances around us? And just things have gotten more complicated, harder. Supply chain issues, staffing, finances. Durango's seen a lot of changes during COVID, with a huge influx of people who aren't from here, and housing prices, and homeschools and masks and all the things. And that's on top of all the things that we deal with on a regular basis of family and partnerships and job and environment and all these other pieces. So, how do we continue to recover quickly, and how do we navigate, a change that's ongoing, because that doesn't seem to stop or continues to present new opportunities for growth. And then and I thought I would go over the other definitions as well. So resilience also refers to the property of a material that enables it to resume to its original shape or position after being bent, stretched or compressed. And so the synonym there is elasticity. Now, while I wouldn't refer to us as, let's say, metal or wood or something like that, which I think this is referring to, I really feel like, again, this is representative of us as humans and our ability to get bent out of shape, literally and figuratively, and then assume our natural form or our more natural state of being when we feel bent, stretched, or compressed, which is really, I think, a cool way of thinking about stress. Because when we talk about physics and a stressor and the physical form, we're talking about this thing that puts pressure on another item. And I think that that's an interesting way to think about stress for us and how we can look at our perception of being stressed or compressed and maybe looking at it more of an ability or an opportunity to expand or stretch. And then finally, we have the act of resilient, leaping or springing back, the act of rebounding. And I think that's what so many of us are looking forward to. In every spring, I think we look forward to rebounding into all that spring has to offer, the birds and the worms and the new growth that's coming up from the ground and the longer days and more sunshine and that sense of kind of fullness and hopefulness that often accompanies the springtime. I think is also where there's a lot of us that are hoping that we can resume life as normal. As Jack mentioned, I'm going on vacation on Friday. I'm going to Belize and to the beach because that feels like a return to normal for me, to travel and to recreate and explore new places. And that's been off limits for a long time for many of us. So, this idea of springing back into that more homeostasis and what feels more natural and aligned for us. And then, so just, non-dictionary definitions, like what are we talking about resilience? What are we really talking about? And we're talking about, in essence, what gives people the psychological, but I would also say emotional and physiological strength to cope with stressful times and hardship. It also refers to this mental reservoir of strength that people are able to call on in times of need to carry them through without falling apart. And so this is an important concept when we talk about resiliency, is that we want to be able to move through these times of hardship, and engage in more positive coping mechanisms. I keep on referring to COVID because this is where we're at, but a lot of people, when the shutdowns first happened in March and April of 2020, many people turn to coping skills of increased alcohol use or baking a lot more or increasing sweets, or there's a lot of binging of Netflix and other programming stations. And so those were coping strategies that we kind of go to for these acute stressors. And I think as that time went on, we started to have to develop other coping skills because there was only, I think a lot of people maybe drank more than they were used to. And then for some people, there was an end to that and a wanting to return again to that homeostatic normal. And so, really, what are the tools and resources available to us that we can call on in times of duress? And then what does it mean if you actually are resilient or identify as resilient? And it really, that's just the definition here, is it simply means that you use healthy coping skills to handle adversity. And so again, we'll talk about some of those coping skills in a few moments here. But when we aren't feeling as resilient, it often shows up as overwhelm. And so I really just want to connect those two concepts for you in your mind so that when you are feeling this sense of overwhelm, and again, I hear that a ton, not just in my professional life, but in my friend and family circle as well. This sense of just like there's so much all the time, and there's this overwhelm, and we don't know what to do to get out from under. And so if you're feeling that way, use that as a cue, like, oh, okay, what habits of resiliency do I have access to that I could call on in a deeper way right now? What could I start to be more mindful about bringing into my daily or weekly life that creates that sense of rebounding, that resets what I'm doing? For some people, that's more rest and more sleep. For some people, that's really, a lot of people, we're in February now. In January or in the new year, we'll do a sugar-free challenge or a Whole 30 diet reset, where we're just kind of like creating a new platform to engage from. Other things that we can see when we have less resiliency on board is that we tend to get stuck thinking about the same problems, and we're having a hard time seeing solutions. And so when we catch ourselves dwelling on issues, that's a good sign that your body could use a resiliency upgrade. And so, what can we do to, again, prioritize taking a break? But before we can do that, we have to be able to identify when our resiliency stores have been diminished. And again, when we get used to feeling overwhelmed, or when we get used to cogitating on issues, then it's harder to see. It's kind of gets to be more and more like asking a fish to describe water. It's like, I don't know, I just live in the water. And so if you in your own person can take a few moments even now to think about what are the cues that either in your physical body, in your mind, in your emotional body, or just in that spirit soul connect that you have with yourself and the world around you and with the divine. What are those cues that you can know within yourself, or maybe let a loved one know that, hey, when I start doing X, Y, and Z, it's a good time for you to come in and remind me that I maybe I need some help, or maybe I need to slow down. I'm gonna keep referring to this vacation in Belize, not so much to rub it in, but because I chose it at a time when a few months ago, when I really felt like it was a terrible idea for me to take time off in the middle of this. At my office, we're in the middle of transferring from paper records to electronic health records, which is a gargantuan task. We're also scheduled for a small remodel in March. I've got a couple of new practitioners that I'm trying to help get launched. There's just a lot of projects and pieces on my plate. But when my friend said to me, "Do you want to go to the beach?" my body was like, hell yeah, I want to go to the beach. And then, so I had that moment of inspiration. And then my mind went into all the reasons why I couldn't do it. You haven't budgeted for it. This is really spontaneous. We don't know how much it's going to cost. Can you really take a week off of work? You've got all these projects. Is the office going to be okay? What about your kiddo? All of these things that were the barriers that the mind literally within 3 seconds of that, yeah, I want to go to the beach. The mind like came in and clamped that down. And I've been doing enough of my own resiliency work that I can recognize that now and address some of those concerns that my mind is bringing, and allow myself to choose my yes more fully from a deeper reservoir, from a deeper place. And we'll get into this in a little bit more. And then unhealthy coping skills. Again, I don't like to get into these categories of healthy, not healthy, good for you, bad for you, because we were joking before we went on camera. Sometimes the beer in the middle of the day is just what you want. And do we label that and judge that? Because then we get into that mental pattern of self-criticism and not seeing solutions. And so anyway, that's just my little disclaimer on this word unhealthy. It's more that we're using coping skills that actually either keep us in our low resiliency state or actually deplete us further. And that's how I'd want to define that. Because sometimes, binging a great show is just what the doctor ordered, literally. And sometimes we're using it to escape and to not deal, or to not fill our cup, or to not actually work towards um, a solution-oriented path. This is really, really important. Just because we say that someone has, a lot of resiliency, or is coping well, it doesn't mean that they don't feel emotions. And so just because you're feeling sad or frustrated or grief or distress doesn't mean that you have low resiliency. It's really the pattern of coping and how we handle being with those emotions that will determine whether or not we can move through an adverse scenario with more grace and ease or in a way that's more maladaptive. And so I think that's really important because when we see, especially in our era of social media, when we see other people kind of cruising through life and facing adversity and just plowing right along, we don't always get to hear about the underlying emotions that are also present. And that's not a sign of weakness. I would argue that it's actually a marker of deep courage to be able to slow down enough to look at and acknowledge, wow, there's a lot on board here. I'm carrying a lot of fear around X, Y, and Z. I have a lot of grief. I'm really angry and frustrated that this is the situation in front of me and there's nothing I can do to fix it. So when we have these moments of trying times, they can be these beautiful opportunities to actually slow down, even though the mind, typically, at least my mind, wants me to double down and work twice as hard. Um, the, so it can feel very counterintuitive. It can be a really great invitation to slow down and notice, well, what's here? It's kind of like, it's this big snowy day here in Durango, but it's kind of like having a weather report. Knowing the weather didn't prohibit you from coming to this lunch and learn. It just maybe shifted you coming in person versus attending on Zoom. And so again, like having a barometer for our emotional status operate in the same way. It doesn't mean we don't participate in our life, but it helps us to prepare a little bit differently and maybe take a little bit more care or space or time for transition or just quiet time. White space time is what I call it, where there's just nothing on the calendar, and even if you're puttering around the house, just taking care of odds and ends, that white space time is very nourishing and relaxing to our nervous system and gets us out of that, like, got to do the next thing, got to do the next thing. Okay, so what contributes to resiliency? And this is a really complex question, and what I have here on the slide is a really, really oversimplified answer. But it's really a complex combination of both internal factors and external characteristics. The internal factors would be more genetics and our physical fitness and our family history, our mental health status, that sort of thing. Some of the external environment factors would be more like our environment. What's our home environment like? Is there stress in there? Do we feel safe in our neighborhood? Are we financially secure? And social support. That's a huge external contributor that will help determine whether or not we feel like we have the resources we need to continue moving forward in our path. Okay, so let's break these down one at a time. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have around these as we go through. And so when we take the physical body, one of the things that can build resilience is regular exercise. And I know that probably every single wellness talk you've ever been to anywhere cites exercise as one of the things that's going to be a cure-all. But the truth of the matter is that the stronger we are in our physical body, and the more we can use exercise to strengthen our cardiovascular system and help the liver to detoxify, help our digestion to focus, and help our nervous system to reset. This is one of those go-to things that we just that really helps us to literally have more physiological resilience in times of stress because we're physically stronger. And it also tends to be one of the things that we let go of first when we are busy or feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And so taking a moment to just re-examine that commitment to yourself and maybe putting some of these self-care practices from the optional category into the absolutely essential category, and then seeing what floats from there, what kind of comes down the line. Along the same lines would be eating a balanced, nutrient-dense diet. So there's a bajillion different diets out there, and a lot of them have have really positive aspects, but there really isn't a one diet fits all. And so when I talk about, eating foods that are more nutrient dense, again, this is something that flies out the window when we're stressed. I know for a lot of people, and at times in my life, myself included, popcorn and wine sounds like dinner to me. And that's just what we're doing. And that's okay. But if we continue to do that, then we run into problems long term because we're not really filling our bodies with foods that are nutrient dense. So one thing that I might do is maybe pour a glass of wine and a glass of Pellegrino, like a mineral water. So I'm getting some minerals in there. If I'm making popcorn, I'll put brewer's yeast and sea salt. So I'm getting some of the trace minerals in the sea salt. I'm getting B vitamins through the brewer's yeast. So it's not so much about giving up anything that you love. It's about how do I shift that even just a little bit so that I can be receiving more macro and micronutrients. A great thing, I have a lot of people who love chips and salsa or chips and guacamole. That's awesome. Nothing wrong with that. But how about a small bowl of chips and then also a plate of cut up veggies like radishes and jicama and carrots and cucumbers to dip in your salsa and guac as well. So we can go on and on about this, but it doesn't have to mean that you're totally trashing your current diet and like 180ing away. It's just like look at your plate and how do you get some more veggies in there? We switched from, sometimes we have regular mashed potatoes, but often we'll do cauliflower mashers instead of potatoes, again, simply because the brassica family has a lot of detoxifying properties, helps to regulate hormones, and just is more nutrient dense than, say, a white potato. So this is going to help give you those cofactors that your nervous system and your cells and tissues need to help you continue to function optimally. Diaphragmatic breathing. So that's a fancy way of saying breathing into your belly. And so I actually um, want to take a moment and actually teach you how to diaphragmatically breathe. Right now, I can't see you all, and a lot of you have your screens off, which is fine. But if you have a moment and nobody will see you or nobody's paying attention, if you want to close your eyes and just really focus on taking a few breaths all the way down into the belly. And so a lot of times when I ask people to take a belly breath, I see this. And so these are your shoulders. Your diaphragm is that awesome muscle between your lungs and your gut that helps to pull your lungs down when you take a deep breath. And that's what allows you to get more oxygen, but it also allows you to get more circulation and that sort of thing. And so as I'm talking, I just want you to practice breathing deeply into your belly. If you were lying down, I would have you put like a teddy bear or a pillow on your belly and see if you could watch it move up and down. Especially for us ladies, we've gotten into the habit of pulling in our belly. I'd really encourage you right now to just really soften the belly and allow that inhale to really fill up the belly and push it out, and the exhale really pulling in those belly muscles to get all that stale air out. And so continue to practice this diaphragmatic breathing as I tell you why on a nervous system level this is so important. And so there's this really cool cranial nerve called the vagus nerve. I think a lot of you have probably heard about it. But the vagus is the Latin term for wanderer. So there's this nerve that comes out of the brain and it wanders all over the body. And one of the nerve endings for the vagus nerves goes into the diaphragm. And the vagus nerve is the biggest nerve that helps to stimulate the parasympathetic or rest, digest, and relax part of your nervous system. So when you breathe into your belly, you are literally telling your brain to calm down. And there's actually 5 times as many nerve fibers going from the diaphragm to the brain as there is from the brain in the opposite direction. So just simply breathing into your belly tells your nervous system, hey, switch from that sympathetic fight or flight response, that stressed out response that most of us spend 80 to 90 to 100% of our time in these days, even though we're evolutionarily meant to spend about 10% of our existence in that state and then recover into the parasympathetic. So things that you can do before you open your email, take 3 belly breaths. if your cell phone rings or you get pinged on your computer, take one deep breath and then answer it. So this is something that you can do throughout the day that just helps to nudge your nervous system in that relaxed direction. And so if you want to play with this as we continue talking, you're welcome, but just really some nice deep breaths into the belly. If you want to take it one step further, and again, I'm the only one not on mute, so you'll hear me and nobody else, nobody's going to hear you. One really nice thing to do that gets oxytocin circulating, and oxytocin is a very relaxing hormone that we don't talk about very much in the body, is that if you can take a deep breath and then sigh on the way out. Kind of like that. What that does is it stimulates the release of oxytocin. Go ahead and try it. Nobody can hear you. And it actually feels great. I do this all the time when I'm breathing, especially when I'm behind a car and I'm like, come on, you should have taken that light. And, kind of getting a little aggro in my car. I'll just do a ah kind of breath. Again, it stimulates that oxytocin. When we open the throat like that to let out sound like that, it also signals the rest of our organs to open and relax. And there was one other thing. Oh, that same vagus nerve, it innervates the soft palate and some of the nerve fibers in your inner ear. So when you sing or chant or gargle, gargle in the mornings, or sing, chant, gargle, or laugh, you're stimulating those vagus nerve fibers in the root of your tongue, the soft palate, and your inner ear. And that's another cue, a physiological cue to your nervous system to move into that restful state. So even if your days are full and busy, these are things that you can do to help reset in a moment without having to create this really extensive wellness plan that ends up depleting more of your resiliency than it creates. Sleep is a big thing, again, chicken or the egg here, where when we feel low resiliency, we can often find that our sleep quality diminishes. And there's a myriad ways to address your sleep issues. We don't need to get into all of those here, but I'm happy to meet you in my office and talk to you about that, because I just want to name how complex sleep can be. We can see sleep disturbance from blood sugar dysregulation. A lot of people are doing these 14, 16-hour fasts now, and sometimes we just don't have the carbs to fuel good sleep. A lot of times there can be a hormone imbalance, especially for menopausal or perimenopausal women. When we lose or our progesterone reduces in quantity, that can have a big impact on our sleep. Nervous system and nervous system function can have a big impact. Adrenal health, so your adrenals are your glands that produce your cortisol or your stress hormones. And if that glandular system, that hormone system is off, then we don't have that nice ski slope where cortisol is high in the morning and cruises down as the day goes on. And when we have that ski slope down, that triggers melatonin and serotonin to come on at nighttime to ensure good sleep. And so that our circadian rhythms can be off, or we could have adrenal dysfunction. There's a lot of mind body reasons that we're not sleeping, sleep hygiene, getting into bed at a reasonable hour, all sorts of reasons why you might not be sleeping that might be related to things that you didn't know. So even if you've tried melatonin, there might be, and it didn't work, there might be some other options for you in the natural realm that don't cause dependency and things like that. There's some CBD products that are out there that can be really great in a quick pinch too. So other things to build up this physical resilience, supplements. These are just general supplements, fish oil, magnesium, B vitamins. Those are generally safe with most medications, not all. So you're always going to want to check with your healthcare provider. But those are kind of some of my basic. Most everybody could benefit from taking fish oil because that helps in cell-to-cell communication. It helps brain and nervous system function. It helps regulate inflammation and cardiovascular health. Magnesium is one of those minerals that, because our soils tend to be so depleted, it's harder and harder to get from food sources. That can help with good sleep quality, restless legs, any sort of cramping or spasm, and bowel function. And then B vitamins. So B vitamins are water soluble, so we can become depleted in B vitamins in as little as 3 weeks. And so we really want to keep our B vitamin levels high. I suggest B vitamin injections because we can get a much higher dose in the body and we absorb 80 to 85% of it, whereas when we take an oral supplement, it's lower. It's like 12 to 16% absorption. So I think that's an easy way to get those into your system. We do offer those at Pura Vida. If you're ever interested in learning more, let me know. But if you do want to take an oral supplement, that's awesome. You want to look for B vitamins that have been activated or methylated. So B12 would come up as methylcobalamin instead of cyanocobalamin. B6 would be pyridoxine, no, B5 would be pyridoxine 5-phosphate, so or P5P. So you just want to, either ask the healthcare practitioner that you're working with and make sure that those B vitamins are activated so that you can have the best chance of utilizing them optimally in the body. There's a whole bunch more supplements that we could talk about, but those are kind of the basics that I think most people could consider taking, and they could all be a once a day, just take them before bed. I take my B vitamins at bedtime. I'm not sensitive to them. Every now and then I have someone who's energetically sensitive and B vitamins give them a lot of energy. So then just take them with breakfast. Don't take B vitamins on an empty stomach because they can create some nausea. And then from the herbal world, the amazing world of botanical medicine, we have this whole category of herbs called adaptogens. And so adaptogens do just that. They help us to adapt to our situation. So if our nervous system is upregulated, they help to downregulate it. But if there are systems that are downregulated, they help to upregulate it. So these are very balancing herbs, generally considered safe for most people. But again, we never wanted to start taking something, especially if you're on medications. But some general ones that are more energetically neutral are like rhodiola, ashwagandha, milky oats, eleuthero, and cordyceps. Cordyceps is a mushroom. But all of these have been shown in the research to actually build physiological resilience to stress. So I have a bottle on my desk that I use every day, just because it's been a hard time, and why not offer our body some plant support. Okay. So building some mental resilience. This is usually where most of us want the most input. So the most important thing, well, maybe not the most important, but the first thing I'm going to talk about is holding a positive view of yourself and your abilities. So when we move from stress to crisis is when we don't see ourselves as having enough resources to handle the situation in front of us. So when that critic or that self-judge, hops in and starts, tearing us down, that really impacts our ability to mentally have the resilience to stay in the game enough to figure out what's the solution, what are my options, how do I address this thing that's here. And that plays into the ability to make realistic plans, and emphasis on realistic, and stick to them. So if you don't have, let's say you decided that yoga is going to be your resiliency building tool, but you don't have a yoga practice at all right now, going to a yoga studio for an hour and a half class 5 times a week is probably not a realistic place to start. But maybe hopping on YouTube and finding an online class, or maybe looking at the local yoga studios and finding one class that sounds good to you to just put your toe in the water. Or maybe it's something as simple as, just standing on your mat every day somewhere in your house and doing, kind of putting your arms over your head and then reaching down and touching your toes and then starting again and doing that 3 to 5 times and moving on. So, when we create a plan for ourselves, regardless of the solution, or sorry, the problem that we're trying to solve, and it's too big, that actually feeds into that cycle of overwhelm. And so I just got off the phone with a patient, and he's looking to move out after moving back in with his parents. He's a young adult, post-COVID, and it's very daunting for him. It's very overwhelming to consider moving out for a whole bunch of reasons. And so the part of the work that he and I are doing is breaking down that goal into much smaller chunks. And I just got off the phone with him before this talk, and he had completed the first step and felt really great about, having taken a manageable step into into the direction of what he wants to do, which is have some independence as a young adult. So, being able to, and maybe you want to think big and plan big, and that's awesome, but break it down into smaller, more digestible pieces so that it's actually realistic and you can stick with it, and then not get caught in the cycle of like, oh, my plan was to go to yoga 5 times a week and I didn't, and I suck and I'm terrible and I'm always doing this and I've got no willpower and not. I mean, we all know, right? We all have a critic, so that's a little smattering of mine. And then noticing thought patterns of being the victim. And so, one phrase I would offer you that has been really helpful for me in switching my point of view on this is, this is happening to me. And switching that is to, this is happening for me. And so, in that, the invitation is always looking for the gift that's here that maybe we're just not seeing. And then discovering and reconnecting to your joy. This is one of the questions on my intake form for my patients. And so many times people are like, I don't know, joy, what does that even mean? And so maybe that's something that you used to be involved with. Maybe that's something you did as a kid. Maybe that's something you've always been tickled to see somebody else doing, but haven't, wanted to try it out yourself. And maybe it's really simple. Maybe it's, having a cup of tea and having silence for 15 minutes before anybody else in the house wakes up. Maybe that's, going to a tropical beach and going scuba diving for the first time in 10 years. And, so it could be whatever that is, but it can be small joys or like giant joys, but just, bring that back into your awareness. Again, joy is one of those things that gets buried as we get more and more in this mental pattern of overwhelm and burden that I have to do. Okay, emotional resilience. So I'm going to move through this relatively quickly, but this could be a whole day long workshop. And so learning to be present to your emotions. And this is where that mind and the heart are going to interplay a lot. And I think I told you before, when I had my first emotional or inspired, like, oh, yeah, I want to go to the beach, let's do that. And then the mind kind of came in. If I were able to slow down, I was able to feel into the fears that were present around taking a beach vacation, and just be with them, like, oh, okay, that's fair, these are all things to consider, without having to fix it or figure out what am I going to do about that. I've had the past 6 weeks to figure out what I'm going to do with all the logistics. There's plenty of time there, but until I identified that I had fear about saying yes to a beach vacation, I wouldn't have been able to move through it and actually really fully choose my yes, which is like, yeah, I'm definitely getting on a plane on Friday. This is totally happening. Effective communication, not as easy as we think. I invite any of you to tell me about the moment in your life where someone sat you down and taught you about what effective communication looks like, the role modeling we had for effective communication in our homes, in our schools, in our home societies, that sort of thing. It's not as easy as you think. So two offerings that I have for you around that is reflective listening. Really, and this plays into empathy, which I'll just talk about it now, but that's the last one on my list, is on this idea of empathy is simply attempting to try to understand somebody else's point of view. It is not hearing their point, trying to understand where they're at and then trying to fix it. And I think that's where we get confused a lot when it comes to something like empathy, or being a good person or being a good friend means I'm going to hear what's going to go on and then I'm going to solve it for you, or I'm going to help you get through it. It's really just about listening. And so a tool like reflective listening, oh, I hear you've got some fears coming up about this trip to Belize. Yeah, I do have some fears. Oh, okay. And just allowing the other person that you're in conversation with to just have more access to their emotions. So step one is getting more comfortable feeling into your emotional body. And then step two would be creating space for others to feel into theirs. And another tool that's really helpful for that is nonviolent communication. Rachel Turiel's here in town. She's an excellent facilitator and teacher of nonviolent communication. And that just means, again, it's a lot of practices around building empathy and really listening to what's actually happening beyond the words that are being spoken. And then when all else fails, go back to our good old I statements. Rather than when you da 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 da, you blah 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 blah, Like, hey, I feel X, Y, and Z, and I notice that this is coming up for me. And that allows more open communication without so much defensiveness. And then this idea of compassion and care, and this comes from my teacher, Sylvie Olivier, and this idea that true compassion is noticing what's here, not wishing for it to be different, and then calling in the highest good for all involved. And I think it's the step two of compassion, of not wishing for it to be different, that gets us stuck in this mental pattern of suffering and overwhelm. And so allowing ourselves to find appreciation for, like, oh, this is what's here. This is happening for me, not to me. What's the gift in this that I am not seeing? Because the mind can jump in so quickly and become such a strong judge of the scenario that it can get in the way of us seeing. We see a very narrow path rather than seeing the opportunities that might be all around us. And then this idea of care is, according to my teacher Sylvie, true care is allowing yourself to fully inhabit your own space. And that just means letting yourself be whoever you want to be in the world, and then giving everyone else the freedom to do the same. And so that's very different. I think our culture is in an epidemic of over caring. And so we overextend ourselves to do something for another, to our own detriment. And so, what if you were to fully inhabit your own space and then let everybody else do the same, and then wait and see, oh, hey, could you help me with this? Yeah, I'm happy to help you with that, because I have this well of resiliency, because I allow myself to fully embrace whatever it is that I need moment to moment. And then that allows us to have more capacity to be of service to others when they ask for it. And then seeking support. So just reaching out, in no way, shape, or forms means that you are weak or not enough in your own person. It just means that letting somebody else know what's happening for you, um, it can be incredibly connective. And so when we seek support from family, from friends, from a pastor, rabbi, from a counselor or therapist, from a healthcare worker, an energy worker, whatever you do, it actually requires a lot of courage to be vulnerable and be seen more fully. And so I would encourage you to explore all sorts of healthcare providers. There's a bajillion different ways to support you in your journey. If you don't want to do talk therapy for whatever reason, that's okay. Or if you've done talk therapy in the past and you didn't like it, well, know that there's a lot of other modalities within therapy and therapeutic modalities that might be accessible. Or maybe you want to do some energy work to clear it out on a different level. And then the last piece about seeking support is really to make time to connect with yourself each day. Like I said before, if you don't know what's going on for you and what the environment, what the weather pattern is, it's going to be really hard to effectively address what's coming up and really solve the problem. And we get stuck on this hamster wheel of solutions and, like, well, I did the thing and why didn't that fix it? And I did the thing and why didn't that fix it? And I've been working so hard, but I'm not getting ahead. I always think about the image of the corridor that just keeps on getting longer and longer, and we're running down in that dream and we never get to the end. I don't know about you, but I can really relate to feeling that way often. And it's not until I stopped doing and started being more with what was underneath that drive, that the mental analysis and solution creation, that I was like, oh, that's fear. Oh, that's hurt. That's something else. And what's required to tend to that is totally different than the laundry list of awesome solutions that my brain came up with. So there's a time and a place for the mind. It's just not as often as the mind would have you think. So if you're interested in learning more, there's some great books out there. Overcoming Overwhelm is amazing, by a naturopathic colleague of mine. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers is a classic about stress and how we relate to stress. The Chemistry of Calm is a book written by a psychiatrist colleague of mine that talks about all these different steps to building resiliency and calm, from exercise to diet to supplements and daily practices. And then there's a few other books here as well. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take those now. Here's my name, my phone number, my email. here's the times that we do have drop-in B12 shot clinics and then a bunch of other B vitamins as well. And but don't hesitate to reach out anytime, because know that we live in this amazing community of people, because they're amazing. And so if you reach out there, you'll be surprised how many people will be there to hold you, and how good that feels to receive that, as well as then heal, build up your own resiliency, and then be able to hold space for somebody else in the future. So thank you so much. Anybody have any questions?
So can I reach out to you while you're in Belize?
You can, but I won't respond because I'm going to go build up my resiliency stores. Anybody else?
But I do want to point out one thing, and I use the term mental floss every day, and just taking that time. And one of the things that you've helped me with is just kind of that identifying and then learning how to deal with something. And there's been a lot of stress, and I've said it over and over these last 2 years. Every time we had the task force meeting, I would say, I think the mental impact of COVID is going to exceed the actual virus, because the stress that we're all under. So I do,
Yep.
I tell people, I've gone through some crazy times the last couple of years, and just to let people know, I think it's important to know you're not alone. And a lot of people, when I tell them things that I've gone through, they go, "Wow, I felt the same way." Oh yeah, how did you deal with that? So yeah, definitely, whether you reach out to Nicola or some other provider, whatever, just know you're not alone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even if you want to reach out to me for a referral, I know a lot of people who do great work in this town, and I'm happy to help find the right person to meet your need. Even if you feel like what I offer isn't the right fit, that's no problem. I always offer free 15-minute consults. So if you want to chat or just email me, hey, I'm looking for a therapist, I'm happy to connect you or get you hooked up, because what Jack's talking about is right. And the research that's coming out, about mental health and substance abuse, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, domestic violence. I mean, these numbers are skyrocketing, with over 60% of Americans now reporting one or more of those mental health issues. And so if you think about, more than half of our country is reporting that they are not feeling as mentally well as they have prior. My guess is I'd probably put that closer to 80 to 90%. So I'm with you, Jack. I think the mental impact of this whole thing is going to be far reaching, and we're only on the iceberg of it. And even things like as restrictions lessen, for some people it's like, yay. And then for other people it's like, oh God, am I safe? Right. So I just got the email this morning that 9R is going to not, take away the mandatory mask in schools thing starting February 28th. And I anticipate for some that's going to be a huge relief, and for some it's going to create so much worry and anxiety. So I just think we need to keep on being in conversation and stay connected. Anybody else have anything they want to even share?
Yeah, I'll share the slides once you send them over to me, and then I can send out your contact information to everyone as well. We did record this, so if anybody wants to see it again, I'm happy to share that as well.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Jack and Kim and Jen, and who else is on there? Somebody else is from the chamber, Hannah. So yeah, I really appreciate you all hosting me, and thanks for creating this resource in our community. I think it's really important.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and enjoy your downtime.
Thanks.
Yes. Good job.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks. See y'all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.